大家好，我是 Olive Branch Allen. So I know a lot of you guys are really trying to put in a lot of effort now to live healthier, eat healthier, and you're trying to change your eating habits. But there's a lot of conflicting information out there. In this video, I'm going to share some tips that hopefully can help you go about thinking about what exactly a healthy meal looks like, and more importantly, how to sustain a healthy eating meal and what that means for your lifestyle. Okay, guys, there's four main points I want to talk about. First one being that everyone is very different in how they process nutrients and food. So you might be getting a lot of advice from this channel or from other channels, and it's telling you how to eat. Well, please take that with a grain of salt, no pun intended, and that you should really be careful with advice because it could be very effective for some people and just not good advice for others. So we are all very different, and hence you should always be looking after what works for you and what doesn't. Okay, point number two is that we really should stop emphasizing so much on reductionism thinking or nutrient analysis. When we dig really deep into one nutrient, like salt is good or bad for you, or meat is bad for you, we're actually losing sight of the bigger picture. Understanding nutrients was actually a very important step when we were understanding nutrition as a field of study. For example, back in the day when there were a lot of European sailors who sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, they would frequently get sick, and the doctors didn't understand why until later they realized that they didn't have any fresh food. And so they were actually deficient in vitamin C. So they started to bring in lots of lemons and limes on board so that when they ate that, the vitamin C would come into their system and then they would not get scurvy anymore. This is actually why they would call some of the sailors back in the day limeys, because they would be sucking on limes during the trip. Just a fun fact. However, trying to give nutrition advice based on certain nutrients is a little bit foolhardy. It's seeing forest from the trees. In other words, you're missing the bigger picture. And that's because nutrients, they don't work in isolation. They work very much dependently on other nutrients around that's usually included in a food substance. Just to give you an example, we eat vegetables like carrots or tomatoes. We don't just eat a certain nutrient, like we need more beta carotene, which is the orange pigment found in carrots. It's not like we need that, so we search for it and we take a pill, but instead we eat the whole food itself, carrot or the tomatoes. And so this is an important distinction to make, that we're eating foods, we're not eating nutrients. Okay, so point number three are the concepts that I want to provide that might be helpful to you guys, and that is also broken down into 4 points. First one being whole foods is always better than processed foods. Now, what does that mean? If it's a whole food, then it's a type of food that your grandparents would probably recognize. Whereas all the new foods that we see in shelves of supermarkets and convenience stores, your grandparents have a good chance of not really knowing what that is. And that's because it's heavily processed, it's packaged, it's branded. Whole foods don't have a brand. Carrots don't have a brand. Salmon does not have a brand. So these are probably what you should be aiming for when you're eating. Things that don't have brands is usually a safer bet that it's a whole food and that your body will be better for. Second point, the concept I want you to understand is the idea of balance. Because we do need micronutrients, vitamins and minerals of all sorts, and because it's not a good idea to just pick out one nutrient that you need to target, but rather all of them, it makes sense to have your meals be balanced, have a good variety of different food groups. So that's why you want to consider the macros such as fat, protein, and carbohydrates, as long as you nail these three. Okay, we don't need to go in much detail, but as long as they're whole foods, like salmon for protein and maybe some fat, maybe you have an olive oil based dressing for some salad, which is the carbohydrates. Like this completes the whole balance, the whole picture. Number three is portion control. Eating less is more. Let me say that again. This is a very important point. The less you eat, the longer you live. Okay, I'll probably do another future video on what that really means, but just understand that we are too used to having food abundance where we are eating all day non-stop, which elevates your insulin levels, and that causes a lot of diseases, metabolic diseases. And so if you go back to the past videos, we talk about how insulin level is really bad for the body, but the less you eat, the less insulin production you'll have, the better it is for your overall health systems. The last concept, and this is actually universal to almost everybody, and that is that you should try your best to avoid as much sugar as possible. When I say sugar, I mean the sweet stuff, as well as the bad fats, the trans fats, and the polyunsaturated fats for cooking, like the cooking oils that we mentioned. Both of these two nutrients, sugar and bad fats, I've talked extensively in past videos, so please go back and review those videos because these two are probably the only two main nutrients that I do recommend to avoid for health. Okay, so those are the four concepts. Now going back into the four main categories, the last one is to focus more on your eating habits versus the nutrients. Again, you don't want to be obsessing over the small details. Rather, focus on how you're eating in a week. How many days of the week are you eating out? Why mai? Or are you eating at a restaurant? Versus how much are you cooking? How often are you buying junk food for snacks as opposed to eating raw nuts or a piece of fruit? Again, these are whole foods. So you want to really analyze your patterns as opposed to this one nutrient. I have to hit that nutrient or I take that as a supplement form. Again, that is not the point. You really want to think of your eating as a whole sustainable system, and you want to analyze the system as a whole and make tweaks to that. So that's it, guys. In conclusion, guys, I do want to make a disclaimer that once again, I am not a doctor, so please don't listen to this advice for medical information. This is purely informational purposes only. I do recommend that you do try to do your own research, and just in summary, don't focus so much on the nutrients itself, rather the whole eating habit as a whole picture. I hope you found that useful. I'll see you next time.